Every morning at 7:30, the old man would shuffle into Miller's Café with his worn leather satchel hanging from his bony shoulder, his hands trembling slightly as he counted out exact change for a single cup of black coffee. His coat was threadbare at the elbows, his shoes were scuffed beyond recognition, and his white hair stuck out in uneven tufts as if he'd forgotten what a comb was for. The regulars had given him a nickname they thought he couldn't hear, the Ghost. They said it with smirks behind their expensive lattes, rolling their eyes as he took his usual seat by the window, the one with the wobbly leg that no one else wanted. To them, he was invisible, a relic of a forgotten time, someone who had clearly made all the wrong choices in life, and now existed as a living warning of what not to become. If you believe that every person has a story worth hearing, that kindness costs nothing, and that we should never judge someone based on their appearance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment about a time someone surprised you, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter. Marcus Chen had been coming to Miller's Café for 3 months, and in those 3 months, he had perfected the art of being invisible. He would sit in his corner, sip his coffee slowly to make it last, and watch the world rush by through the rain-streaked window. He saw young professionals tapping urgently on their laptops, couples holding hands across tables, groups of friends laughing so hard they cried. He saw life happening all around him, and he remembered when he had been part of it, when he had been someone people noticed, someone people respected. But that was before the diagnosis, before the medical bills that swallowed his savings like a hungry beast, before he'd had to sell everything he owned just to pay for treatments that ultimately failed to save the person he loved most in this world. The mockery had started subtly, a barista making jokes about his exact change, counting it out with exaggerated slowness while others in line sighed with impatience. A group of college students who would sit at the table next to his and make loud observations about people who should just stay home if they couldn't afford a decent cup of coffee. A businessman who once actually asked him to move because his appearance was ruining his important client meeting. Marcus had weathered it all with quiet dignity. His eyes focused on the window, his hands wrapped around his cup for warmth because his apartment's heating had been shut off 2 weeks ago. What none of them knew was that Marcus woke up every morning at 5, put on his best remaining clothes, and walked 4 miles to this cafe, because it was the only place that still felt like the world he used to know. His wife Sarah had loved this cafe. They had celebrated their 30th anniversary here, right at the table where that businessman had dismissed him like trash. The cafe owners had changed, the menu had changed, even the paint on the walls had changed. But the light that came through the window at exactly 8:15 in the morning was the same light that had made Sarah's eyes sparkle when she laughed. Coming here was Marcus's way of holding on to her, of keeping her memory alive in a world that seemed determined to erase both of them. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus noticed something different in the cafe's atmosphere. There was a new employee, a young woman named Emma, who couldn't have been more than 25, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. She was training, learning the ropes, and Marcus saw her watching him as he counted out his change. He prepared himself for another round of humiliation, but instead she simply took his money, thanked him warmly, and asked if he'd like his coffee in his usual spot. It was such a small gesture, but it nearly broke him. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and made his way to his table. But today the mockery was worse than usual. A group of 3 men in expensive suits had taken the table next to his, and they were being deliberately cruel. One of them kept glancing at Marcus and making loud comments about how pathetic some people were, how they refused to get real jobs, how they were probably scamming the system. Another suggested that the cafe should have standards, that letting people like that in was bad for business. The third one, emboldened by his friend's laughter, actually took a photo of Marcus with his phone, clearly planning to post it somewhere for laughs. Emma, refilling coffee at a nearby table, saw this happening. Her face flushed with anger, and she started walking over, but Marcus caught her eye and shook his head gently. He had endured worse. He would endure this too. But something in him, some last reserve of dignity that he thought had been completely depleted, suddenly stirred. Maybe it was the thought of Sarah, of how fiercely she would have defended him. Maybe it was simply that he was tired of being treated as less than human. Whatever it was, Marcus reached into his worn leather satchel with hands that shook not from age, but from emotion. He pulled out a photograph, carefully protected in a plastic sleeve that he'd carried with him every single day for the past 8 months. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly in the suddenly quiet cafe, and walked over to the table of men who had been mocking him. Without a word, he placed the photograph on their table. The image showed a younger Marcus, 40 years younger, in a firefighter's uniform, his face streaked with soot and ash. He was carrying a small child out of a burning building, and behind him, flames consumed what had once been an apartment complex. The photo had made the front page of newspapers across the state. It had been taken on the day Marcus had run into a collapsing structure 5 times, saving 3 children and 2 elderly residents before the building came down. But that wasn't all the photograph showed. In the corner, there was a smaller picture clipped to it, a commendation from the governor, a medal of valor, and a letter of gratitude signed by the families he'd saved. Marcus's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet but steady. He told them that he had been a firefighter for 32 years, that he had saved 47 lives over his career, that he had been injured so many times he'd lost count. He told them about Sarah, his wife of 35 years, who had been a nurse and had died of cancer 8 months ago, how he'd sold everything they owned to pay for experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. He told them about the pension that had been mismanaged by corrupt officials and was now tied up in legal battles he couldn't afford to fight. He told them that every single morning he came to this cafe and sat in that wobbly chair because his wife had loved the light that came through the window, and it was the only piece of her he had left. The cafe had gone completely silent. One of the suited men had tears streaming down his face. Another was staring at the photograph with his hand over his mouth. The third one, the one who had taken the mocking photo, had deleted it from his phone and was fumbling with his wallet. But Marcus didn't want their money. He carefully picked up his photograph, held it against his chest for a moment as if drawing strength from it, and returned to his seat. Emma brought him a fresh cup of coffee, and this time she didn't charge him. She simply squeezed his shoulder gently and whispered that his coffee was on the house, today and every day after. What happened next spread through the cafe like wildfire. The businessman who had once asked Marcus to move came over and apologized, tears in his eyes, and picked up Marcus's tab for the next month. The college students who had mocked him started a crowdfunding campaign. That raised enough money to cover Marcus's rent for a year. The 3 men in suits didn't just apologize, they used their connections to help Marcus navigate the legal system to recover his pension. Within weeks, the story had spread throughout the community, and Miller's Café became known as the place where people remembered that everyone has a story, that dignity isn't measured in bank accounts, and that heroes don't stop being heroes just because life knocks them down. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you to look beyond appearances and treat everyone with kindness and respect, please like this video and share it with your friends and family. Comment below with the word respect if you believe our heroes deserve better. Marcus still comes to Miller's Café every morning at 7:30. He still sits by the window with a wobbly leg, though someone has fixed it now. He still watches the morning light that Sarah loved so much. But now people stop by his table to say hello, to share their own stories, to remind him that he matters. And every single morning, Emma makes sure his coffee is exactly the way he likes it, served with the respect and dignity that should have been his all along. Because in the end, we're all just people carrying invisible burdens, fighting invisible battles, hoping that someone will see us not for what we appear to be, but for who we truly are. And sometimes, all it takes is one photograph, one moment of courage, to remind the world that every person sitting alone in a cafe has lived a life of depth, courage, and profound meaning.